is exciting in a minute. We have several experts with us already. Some will be still joining us. The purpose of this roundtable is manifold, and I will explain it in a minute if you allow me, because let me just show you a brief history of the International Postdoctoral Program story. It was actually after we scheduled this roundtable that I have realized that next year marks 10th anniversary of our postdoctoral program recruiting. For the 2012-2013 year, we had our first, it was the experimental setup, postdoctoral program with just 8 recruits. And then in 2013, the decision was made to expand the program to 25 positions. In 2013-2014, we have received 97 applications for those 25 positions. Now, it's interesting that ever since 2013, through highs and lows, and we have survived, or maybe, we still haven't survived, the crisis of 2015, when the ruble value went sharply down, making our postdoctoral program a lot less attractive from the standpoint of compensation, because obviously foreign faculty who come to Russia, they think in terms of US dollars or euros. And with the financial crisis, when ruble lost 50% of its value almost overnight, we were concerned about the survival of international recruiting program. Turned out that it did survive, and at least from the standpoint of the number of applications, the applications grew every year without exception. And in fact, in the last 3 years, since 2017-2018, the number of applications that we received for the program has doubled. This year, we have set another record. We have over 550 applications for 50 positions. And at this point, I had to pause and ask myself, what do we define as success? Is that 550 applications, is that a lot of applications? You have to consider, though, that half of the 50 positions are our returning postdocs, the ones that are with us already. So the actual competition for the spots is twice as large as what you see on the screen. So I had to ask myself, how do we measure success of the program? The fact that we are well known now in the world 10 years later, and that people are applying in large numbers, is that an indication of success? Or is that a reflection of a very poor market worldwide? Because, of course, we all know that in the situation of COVID, many universities stopped hiring. So going forward into the 10th anniversary year of postdoctoral program, I wanted to reflect a little bit on what success is. Is our program truly successful? And that brings us to a question, how do we actually define this success? I have done some research preparing for this roundtable, and I realized that no matter where I look, success of the program is measured in numbers. On the university level, many different universities, and I have used schools mostly in the United States, but also some schools in Europe. Administrators measure the success of a program in number of applications, renewals, continued contracts. There are actually not very many universities that offer contracts for postdoctoral fellows. Most likely, postdoctoral fellow is a terminal position, unless postdocs bring their own finances to the table. So if they bring a grant, and then they can stay on that grant in a research lab. And this is especially true for natural sciences, such as biology or chemistry. At the laboratory or unit level, success is defined as a number of publications, number of seminars, some other postdoc activities. And then the question becomes, what defines success on the individual postdoctoral researcher level? Is that the number of publications, or is it the number of job offers that they receive?
Valentina Viktorovna, we are sorry for interrupting you, but unfortunately we do not see how the slides move.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know, because when I am So do you see the slides at all?
No,
I see, but
I think
It
it happens partially. Maybe we could translating them from here so that you can comment on them. If you can kindly please send them out.
Okay, so you see the first slide. Do you see the slides now or not? Still the first slide, right?
Не видно ничего, очень ветрено.
Okay, so I'm going to send this presentation to someone else to translate. If you please excuse me and give me just a second to do that, okay? Because I was not aware that we're having this problem. So if you just give me just a second. In the meantime, I can continue talking while I'm doing this because you don't necessarily have to see the slide in order for me to keep talking. So I was talking about the fact that in most of the universities, there, especially in the social sciences, people measure success on individual levels somehow differently. And it turns out that not very many people actually talk about success for an individual postdoc. I think it becomes increasingly important that we define success for postdocs because the program is for them. It's not for anyone else. And Ajana, please let me know once you do receive the slides because I sent them to you. Hopefully you receive them right away.
Yes, I have just received it. Now I will start translating. Showing it, broadcasting it to everyone.
Okay. I was just talking today that we didn't have any glitches with our own session on the that we had on networks on our lab, that everything went so well, and I guess I jinxed it or something. Because here I don't have the video and my slides are not showing.
Do you see them now?
Yes.
Excellent. So, Jana, if you could please show the second slide that I was talking about, because that's where we have the breakdown of numbers, the start of the program with just 8 recruits in 2012, which is next year, as I said, marks the 10th anniversary. And then we go to over 550 applications this year, which, as I said, in last 3 years, the number of applications has doubled from 279 in 2018. Then I moved on to the next slide, which is defining success of a program and putting it into numbers. Unfortunately, I cannot see the slides, so Jana, if you just please move over to that slide, that would be great. And colleagues, we have someone who is not muted. We have some background noise. Okay, so do we have the next slide over? The third slide? Okay, colleagues, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. So, You can see and you can hear me. Wonderful. So we'll have to, I guess, communicate through messages and then maybe through some of my questions and answers, because unfortunately I can't see anything that's going on. So yeah, I jinxed the system. So what I was talking about is that then we have an individual level success story, and it comes in very limited numbers. We really don't see a lot of success stories when it comes to individual postdocs. So nobody clearly says what is a successful postdoctoral researcher. A lot of people stay in postdoctoral positions for 3, 6, 9 years, and then a lot of them don't move on to full research positions, sometimes leaving academia altogether. So, Jana, next slide, please. When we talk about postdoctoral success core competencies, this is from the Emory Institute. They were talking about what a successful program is, and that is one of the few programs I have found that talks about success of a postdoctoral researcher on an individual level. Again, I want to talk about the fact that there are lots of numbers out there, lots of reports showing that our postdoctoral researchers have published this and our institution has received this many applications. Those numbers are abound. When you talk about individual success story, it's not that easy. So when we talk about postdoctoral researcher core competencies, it starts with discipline-specific conceptual knowledge, and it's probably obvious and goes without saying that being a postdoctoral researcher, new hires should develop their discipline-specific knowledge. Same goes with research skill development, and then it moves on to communication skills. Now, it becomes a little bit less clear of what is meant by professionalism, leadership and management skills, and responsible conduct of research, even though the code of ethics is more or less defined for the research area in general and for postdoctoral researchers in particular. The leadership and management and professionalism is not that well defined. So we don't really know what that means to develop professionally or to develop leadership skills and management skills for a postdoctoral researcher. Next slide, please. That brings us to the academic measures of success of a postdoc. There should be a certain number of first author publications and reviews. There should be some presentations at national and international meetings. There should be applications submitted for travel grants, travel awards, grants, fellowships, and they should be mentoring younger trainees. Again, these measures of success are very broad. I've copied them verbatim from the requirements at Emory, just to highlight the fact that even best schools out there, Emory is a very good research school, do not highlight the specifics of what defines the success. So I did notice that there are several major requirements for developing a successful postdoc. Of course, institutional environment, cultural environment, and social and professional ties. Those three gears are required for a person to develop professionally and become successful. At the end of my journey into figuring out what it is to be a successful postdoctoral researcher, I still do not know what defines postdoctoral researcher success. Jana, next slide, please. So that brings us to defining success of a program and the discussion questions that we have asked our experts to reflect upon. First is what defines a successful postdoctoral fellow on an individual level. Those people that we hire every year, those 50 people that come from all over the world to over 100 different laboratories that have hired a postdoctoral researcher in the last 10 years. Now, then we have the question of, so how do they define success? How do their supervisors define success and university administrators? And then there is a larger question is why do the universities implement postdoctoral programs and what is the overall success story? So the ultimate question that we want to try to answer today, or at least pave a path to, is how do we make HEC University International Postdoctoral Program successful? So, Jeanne, if you could move back to the first slide, please. Today with us, we have several experts that we have asked to reflect on their experience, maybe offer their definition of success if they have it, share their stories, and help us define at what we are looking for in an international postdoctoral program going forward for the next 10 years, or at least the 10th anniversary year. We'll have a big celebration, I'm sure, within our international postdoctoral program, because it is a big achievement for the university, for the program that started from scratch when not very many people actually believed in its success. But so with us today, Professor Andrei Yakovlev. I can't unfortunately see if Oleg Budnitsky joined us. Alexander Skripchenko is here, Israel Marquez, Michael Rocklitz, and Yulia Grinkevich. They all have different perspectives as lab supervisors, as administrators, and most importantly, of course, as our postdoctoral researchers graduates. So without further ado, I would like to pass on the mic, so to speak, to Professor Andrei Yakovlev, who has one of the most successful stories in terms of growing postdoctoral researchers systematically in his lab 1 year after next. And I would like him to share his reflections of what he defines as success of a postdoctoral.
US, in Europe, and so on. So, and from this point of view, in my opinion, this may be not very standard solution to allocate postdocs at research centers and research labs was beneficial for HSC in general, because we could provide, in general, better conditions for these young colleagues, with opportunity for them to be involved in real research projects, to be linked with Russian partners and so on. Concerning our experience and also maybe some kind of estimation of efficiency of this program at the level of our center. No, I'm talking about International Center for the Study of Institutions and Development. It is a joint project with our colleagues from Columbia University and some other foreign partners. So, of course, we are thinking about publications. It is some kind of formal KPI required from us by Maria Yutkevich and other colleagues. But it's understandable too that during 1 year or even during 2 years, it can be a bit difficult to produce many publications, especially high-level publications. And from this point of view, of course, we tried to take into account, especially at the stage of evaluation of applications, research ideas of relevant candidates, their CVs, their job market papers, their previous experience, of course, yeah. But we made maybe a more stronger focus, not only on the papers, yeah, themselves, but on the incentives and on real research ideas for joint projects. And one of quite serious criteria by selection process at our center is exactly about some kind of mutual interest. And the idea is that every postdoc coming to us should be involved in some joint projects with our main staff. Yeah? And exactly in this way, in my opinion, we can also provide better conditions and better opportunities for postdocs themselves, yeah, in terms of their professional development and so on. One more point. Again, we had the discussions about this story, especially with Valentina Kuskova. Is it possible for HSC to hire former postdocs for tenure track positions and so on? Yeah. I know that some leading universities like Harvard and so on didn't use this approach. They had the different tracks. Tenure track is one track and postdoc it is another track, and typically people receive postdoc positions at Harvard cannot be hired for tenure track positions. Yeah. We discussed this issue for HSC, and in my opinion, final solution to do in another way and to hire former postdocs, again, was right in our environment, under our conditions, simply because, for instance, in the case of tenure track, we invite people for quite a long time period, 6 years finally, but with some kind of intermediate midterm evaluation in 3 years and so on. And comparing to this approach, postdoc positions are much shorter. It is typically 1 year or maybe some extension for 2 years and so on. But exactly due to this involvement in projects and some kind of everyday cooperation with Russian staff, we can maybe evaluate these people more precisely. We can understand better their skills, their ambitions, their motivation. And from this point of view, of course, tenure track position and program of tenure, for tenure tracks is separate, and it should be open for any candidate. But in my opinion, people which had before some experience at postdoc positions at HSC research labs can have some advantage for HSC in terms of some kind of better understanding of their experience at HSC already, and it can be positive and negative, both. It's necessary to understand it, yeah. But at the same time, they already, in some sense, had some opportunities to adopt to Russian environment, Russian reality, some kind of internal requirements of HSC and so on. And in some sense, we are better prepared already for another activity as assistant professors at departments and so on. And no, actually, just now in the room, we have 2 such candidates. First one is Mikhail Rokhlets, and he joined us early. After that, he was appointed to a position of assistant professor at political science department. After that, he was invited to initially postdoc position, after that, to professor's position. But important point is that due to this involvement in our research activity and our joint projects and so on and so on, we are closely linked till now. We have some joint seminars, joint research proposals, some kind of mutual visits and so on and so on. And second case, or second example, is Israel Marquez. He joined us, no, actually in real terms, even early, because Israel started to work with our joint center with Tim Bry already in 2011 as a PhD student of Columbia University. And I think he spent with us already 11 years. So, and just now, Israel is at, I think, final stage of tenure track position at political science department. So, and he had a number of good publications, some of them jointly with our colleagues from our center. So, one more point, Israel was a real initiator and main participant and main researcher in a large project supported by the grant of Russian Science Foundation. And it was a project about professional training in Russia and China with some kind of idea to study public-private partnership between regional authorities, enterprises, and technical schools. And on one hand, it was a number of good publications based on the results of this project, but at the same time, there is also another important line, especially for our center, because we could prepare a number of some kind of policy advice papers based on this project, especially in cooperation with Agency for Strategic Initiatives. And in my opinion, again, it is quite important for some kind of improvement of reputation of HSC as not only research center, but also one of leading think tanks in Russia. No, and in some sense, our research projects with Mikhail Rokhlitz also had both these dimensions. It was not only about some kind of academic research, but also in some sense about policy advice. So maybe it is about some kind of view from our center on this program. Maybe some final words about some limitations or maybe problems of this program, or maybe design of this program in its current version. No, actually, it is some kind of follow-up of our recent discussion with Valentina in a corporate email. Yeah. We are competing with other universities, not only in US, but also in Europe. And on one hand, Valentina told already that we have some kind of real improvement, not only in terms of number, but also in terms of quality of applications. And I can see it also based on our own experience. But it's necessary to understand that we are competing for the most talented people. And it is really very limited number of such people. Yeah? And therefore, in my opinion, for us, it's really important to announce this program early, because in this case, we can at least provide opportunities to apply to our positions for some best candidates. Yeah. And there is another problem, not only about announcement of a program, but also about announcement of results. Yeah, and in my opinion, we are talking already about this problem second year, because we had, unfortunately, such experience 1 year ago also. We lost best candidates because they got offers early from our universities, and it's pity. So maybe I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei Alexandrovich, very much. And for a few minutes here, I had such a serious thunder outside of my window that I couldn't even hear you. So now it's quieted down. But in case it starts thundering again, you can hear what I hear. Thank you for your presentation. May I ask you, I mean, you've made some excellent points. May I ask you a question? So if you were to define success on the postdoc level in a couple of sentences, how would you do that? What would you call a successful postdoctoral researcher, a successful postdoctoral program?
Oh, I think there are two different questions. One is about researchers and another is about program. Yeah, maybe I will start answering the question on researchers. Yeah. Again, I personally was also postdoc researcher in Germany in early 2000s with support of Humboldt Foundation. And especially personally for me, it was really very useful opportunity with real development, professional development, because this opportunity to spend 1 year or 2 years abroad, yeah, with some kind of freedom to do research, and also with lower obligations at the main position. Yeah. No, maybe my personal experience was not very typical because I was already vice rector, and during this 1 year, in reality, I spent 5 months in Russia with the different kind of administrative duties and so on and so on. But nevertheless, even under such limitations, I could produce a paper which was published later at Europe-Asia Studies, and at the moment it is the most cited my paper. Yeah, so with 140 citations or something like that, and so on. But maybe more importantly, for me, this year in Germany really was important in terms of some kind of definition of my research track for the future. Because exactly starting from this time, I was focused mostly on the issues of state business relations in Russia, in broader terms. Yeah. So, and exactly from such point of view, I consider the tracks of my colleagues. So it is not about number of publications produced during this year. It is no sense simply, yeah. But if there are real research projects initiated by postdoc, yeah, and with his deep involvement, and some kind of progress with these projects, yeah, in terms of, for instance, presentations at workshops or conferences, maybe some applications to research grants and so on, yeah. It can be a success, in my opinion. So again, it's a bit difficult to measure these things in quantitative way. It is mostly about quality, yeah, which can be evaluated, especially during short term, only by some experts which are really involved in this field. Of course, if we are talking about long term, about 3 or 5 years, we can see results in terms of publications, in terms of some kind of academic career and so on. And it is maybe some kind of bridge to your second question about the evaluation of a program. Because of course, for a program, we should think not about 1 or 2 years, but about a longer time period. And exactly these results, but again, not only in terms of publications. In my opinion, this focus only on publications can be maybe too limited, because if we are talking about professional development and academic development of relevant people, it is not only about publications, it is mostly about involvement in research activity. And it is about cooperation with other researchers from this university, from other universities, from other countries. It is about participation at high-level conferences, yeah. And of course, it is also about submission of papers to journals. But it is also about applications and successful applications to research foundations and so on. So it is, in some sense, broader picture. But again, finishing this answer, maybe it's better to talk about academic career of our graduates, our former postdocs, in broader sense, including all these components. But again, it can be measured, in my opinion, only in 5 or 7 years after finishing postdoc position at HSE. So thank you.
Well, Andrei Alexandrovich, thank you very much for very interesting comments. And I think you've made a very good transition to successful stories. We have 3 graduates here who agreed to become our experts today. And we have Alexandra Skripchenko, Michael Rochwitz, and Israel Marquez. Each one of them is successful in their own way. And as you said, it's very difficult to measure success of a postdoctoral career in terms of numbers, because it has to be a qualitative evaluation, even though, of course, as administrators, we love to quantify everything and put it in numbers. But we have 3 very different career paths. We have 2 researchers that stayed for tenure track positions here at HSE. We have 1 researcher that stayed and then left and went elsewhere. So, but we also have 2 different tracks even within researchers who are here. Alexandra, after being tenure track professor, became a high-level administrator and a dean of faculty of mathematics. So we know that academic career involves 3 tracks: research, teaching, and administration. And we have not talked about teaching today, and I don't think we will talk about teaching today, because for the most part, postdoctoral positions do not assume any teaching, but they do assume some administrative duties. And with your permission, I would like to pass on the microphone to Alexandra and ask about your experience as a postdoctoral researcher, as a tenure track faculty member, now as a high-level administrator, and maybe get some reflections on how you, Alexandra, define success of a postdoctoral program, postdoctoral researcher, and your own experience.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to participate in such an open table. I'm not very experienced, I have to admit, in this type of scientific activities, because mathematicians do not run open tables regularly. Indeed, I was a postdoc before I became a postdoc at HSE. I was a postdoc in Paris for 2 years. I made a postdoc in Paris, and moreover there I also had 2 different types of contracts. In some sense it's important because One contract was just paid by a grant received by several outstanding mathematicians, and I worked with Arthur Avila, who is a Fields medalist from Brazil, working in France at that time. And the second postdoc contract was much more institutional, in the sense that it was given by some multi-university organization, the Fondation Sciences Mathématiques de Paris. And then I came for a purely university-paid postdoc in HEC, and all three types of contracts and duties were quite different. Then I was a tenure track, I'm still a tenure track associate professor at the Faculty of Mathematics. I became a supervisor of some postdocs, and now I'm a dean, and I'm also responsible for the hiring campaign this year, when we are choosing a postdoc already from the point of view of administration part. I also follow it. So let me try to, not to outline my personal experience, but of course I will refer to it very often, but maybe to try to answer the questions that you posed to Andrei Alexandrovich. And I would like to support his point of view that, in my opinion, it's not the best way to estimate the level of success of a postdoc by the publications, simply because indeed the contract is very short. So in math, very often we need several years to complete some project, and also the publication procedure is not very fast. So even if you submit a paper at the very beginning of your postdoc, and in this sense, this paper is a kind of your heritage from the previous place where you made your PhD or previous postdoc. So it's not even the result of the current one. Then it will probably appear with your current affiliation or even with the next one, depending on the speed of your referee. So it's a bit strange to use the publications as a way to estimate how good you were as a postdoc and how much you fit to the place that you chose. So I think that it's not the best way. From the point of view of the researcher who starts his career and who becomes a postdoc, I think that you estimate the success of your postdoc by the number of research projects that you started while you've been a postdoc. Say, when I was in Paris, I started to collaborate with a few colleagues in France, and I continued to do it, and I do it even now, 10 years after, almost. So from my point of view, this was the level. How did I decide that I was glad to be in France and it was a good choice? It was because I started several projects. Some of them are already completed, some are still going on, even 10 years after. But I think it's the best indicator from the point of view of the researcher. And then as a supervisor, I had a similar experience because I had a postdoc from France here with me in Moscow. And also he spent only 1 year here, so no paper appeared with an affiliation with HEC, unfortunately, but we started several projects, and then we published together 2 papers already after, but they all were initiated in Moscow. And from this point of view, of course, when he left and he went to Germany and then back to France, everywhere he advertised that he started to study this stuff while working with me in Moscow. And so people who were interested in this subject, the young people, they started to ask me if they also can come to Moscow. So in this sense, it was a very successful story. But if you measure it from the point of view of the publications, you don't see any formal result. Then if we look at the same question from the point of view of the institution, I think indeed the most important point is that the postdoc is involved in the scientific life of the laboratory of the faculty where he works or she works. And for example, once again, I'm not the abstract researcher of the institutions in this sense, so I just refer to my personal experience. We had a postdoc from US who spent with us actually even less than 1 year because of some bureaucratic issues. And he never published with any of us and even did not work formally, did not collaborate with any of us, but he was a member of the working group that we organized together with some colleague, and he was a very important member because due to his background, he understood these things that we were studying pretty well. So he helped us a lot in this sense. And then he left, and we continued the research and published a paper on it. And we had a complete impression that we would never arrive to this level without him, even if he was not our former collaborator. He did not contribute to the research itself, but he clarified so many things in the background that was required for this research for us, that definitely for us as an institution, his participation was very important. So these things, once again, it's very hard to measure. But I think if the postdoc is an active participant of several working groups at the faculty, and it does not matter if they are formal or informal working groups, that's already in some sense enough to say that his contribution is important. And from the point of view of the institution, it was a good experience because it definitely stimulates the local people to work on subjects that are a bit too far from their standard research fields and to leave their zone of comfort in some sense. So also I want to admit that indeed the program became much more competitive. When I applied for it in 2013, I had some competitors. It was not easy to get a position because math is a very competitive field in Russia in general. So many people had a biography similar to mine. They left abroad for their first postdoc, but then they wanted to come back, and the HEC was definitely the best place to do it. So it was quite competitive. But this year, for example, we had a competition on a level like more than 15 people on one place. So it's not comparable with what I faced as an applicant. Definitely, we became more popular in this sense, and almost all our applicants, okay, there were some unclear people that always apply, you know, it happens, but with some strange backgrounds that does not fit to the requirements, but really absolute majority of the applicants were totally reasonable, good and promising, and it was a very hard choice. We spent hours arguing at the faculty about the candidates. So going back to your questions, I think that from the point of view of the postdoc, the key point is that you have to find during this time of your postdoc position, you need to find many new plots for your research, because then when you will become a faculty, you will be involved in teaching, you will be more involved in administration. And so it will be harder exactly to extend your borders and to look for completely new fields. And this postdoc period is a good time for experiments. So the good place is the place where you can find exactly more plots and start some projects, not to necessarily to complete them. And from the point of view of the institutions, the key point is that the postdoc is not isolated, that he or she participates actively in the scientific life of the lab or the faculty. And if it is the case, if the person has several people to talk with, to collaborate with, it will be a very good impact for the publications, even if the person will not publish by him or herself. And also it will be a very good experience for the current master and the PhD students, because exactly they will see, it will also kind of extend their borders and give them a better understanding of the perspective of what can they do after they complete their study at HEC, for instance, and so on. And then, since I was exactly the person who was hired as a tenure track directly after the finish of my postdoc contract, I need to comment on the common practice that top universities do not hire their former postdocs. The point is that, for example, this typical thing with MIT and Harvard is that they both are in Boston. So if you are brilliant enough to be taken to both places, indeed, it's very easy from your personal life also to make a postdoc in Harvard and then to get a position in MIT or the opposite. While a similar thing happens in Paris also, when they have several top universities and you can just alternate them, make a PhD at one place and postdoc at another, and then take a position, and for instance, at your home institutions or at the third one. But if it's not the case, and in Moscow, for example, for mathematics, HEC is not the only place, but it's definitely very different from all the competitors from the point of view of how active we are, how much we are involved in the international research and so on and so forth. There are not so many alternatives. So by myself, I would be forced to go abroad if I would not be taken to HEC, just because there is no such a place. Okay, there is a Steklov Institute, but it's a pure academic institute. It's very different in its spirit from the university, right? Otherwise, I would be forced to go abroad. And of course, just from the personal point of view, once I would go abroad, it would be harder for me to go back to Russia because I would already establish some family lives there, and every change of the position would be harder and harder. So if we would like to preserve some people and to consider them in future that they represent some value for us, it's important that we have an opportunity to offer them a position here, because otherwise they will be forced, in many fields, they will be forced to go really abroad, and then it would be much harder to attract them again. And at the Faculty of Mathematics, I'm not the only example. When we hired our former postdoc, we also have another person, Andrei Dymov, who had a similar track. Then also some postdocs that we had, now they work for the Faculty of Computer Science at HEC also. So for us, I think, say, every second postdoc that we had stayed with us or with some other faculty at HEC. And I think that it's kind of a reasonable statistics, because half of people indeed come here just for a new experience, and they do not consider Russia as a place to build their families, say, here. And they leave. And in this case, it's already a good result if they come back later to work with us as collaborators. That's what happened to my French postdoc. He left, he lives now in France, but before the pandemic, he came to Moscow every several months to continue our collaboration. Or they stay here, they work with us, and we're quite satisfied with their scientific level, and probably they are also satisfied because they decided to stay with us. That's it, I think. I should stop here.
Alexandra, thank you very much. This was actually a very interesting story. Turns out I didn't know a lot of this story about you. I do want to ask about your decision to take on a high-level administrator job. Most of us who come into the research domain, especially starting as a postdoc and starting several research streams, we probably don't think about becoming administrators, because once you become an administrator, I'm speaking from experience, your scientific career is over. So do you think you can pull off both, or was this a conscious decision to switch tracks and become an administrator for a while and then maybe return, or how do you feel about that?
Well, it was a hard decision, and I spoke to the previous dean of the faculty, Vladlen Timorin, and Vladlen convinced me that you can combine. Of course, it will not be the same level of research that you would perform without your administrative duties, but kind of you once became a mathematician, you stay a mathematician. You will not leave completely this field. Then moreover, now he became once again a professor at the faculty. He is not an administrator anymore, and he came back to the serious mathematics. And the same happened to Sergei Landau, who has some administrative duties, but still he works hard in math. And just before I became a dean, we published a paper together. So I did math with him, and I saw that everything is fine. with his research level. So I hope that I would be able to combine. Of course, I understand that kind of many things that I would do without these administrative duties, I'm not able to do anymore. But I'm relatively young, and I hope that I will have enough time to be back to mathematics. And now when I have enough energy and I'm still able to speak to students on their language also about some everyday life problems, not only about math, I want to take the advantage of it and push a bit some organizational part of the faculty life. And then I hope I will be back to mathematics, because I still think about myself first as about mathematician and not as about administrator.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you very much. Well, I would like to switch gears a little bit and then move and ask Michael Rochlitz to tell his story, because not only he stayed at HEC, and well, first you were at Ural Federal, right? And then you came to HEC, and then you traveled through Russia, and then you left altogether. So from a perspective of a postdoc who did what, at least in theory, postdocs should do, right? You finish the postdoctoral program and then you move on, even though you didn't move on right away, but in some ways you did. How do you define success? What do you think? Did you think postdoctoral program helped you? What would you suggest as, again, the personal success story, maybe some success measures, and maybe some suggestions for improvement?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. It was nice to be back in this context. I had lots of nice memories also. Probably I'll start by why was the postdoc important for myself? For me, it was really important because I was probably a bit fuzzy, a bit confused at the end of my PhD. I didn't really know where to go and didn't have really concrete plans what to do. I mean, I also was thinking of probably going towards working in an international organization or becoming a kind of adventurer and just traveling.
Mikhail, I'm sorry, can you be closer to microphone?
Yes, I mean, the microphone is here. I can try to speak a bit slower and
yeah, maybe, yeah.
Or channel me and just speak louder.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Okay, so what I wanted to say is that at the beginning, I wasn't really certain if I wanted to move towards an academic career. But then Andrei Alexandrovich, we were at a conference in 2013, I think in February in Suzdal at the Российский экономический Congress. And then Andrei Alexandrovich approached me and said, yeah, we have these postdoc positions at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, and this might be really interesting for you. And then I applied. And this was actually the only place I applied to. And the first time I thought about applying to a place. And I got a position and then became a postdoc. And this was really a very, very rewarding experience, especially the first year. It was a very important, how to say, like training experience to learn how life and work as in academia actually functions and works. And so I benefited a lot with work together with Andrei Alexandrovich and also our American colleagues, John Reuter, David Ciacconi, and Israel as well, because we were all sitting in the same office, went to lunch together, we discussed different questions, we went to conferences, and we started several research programs together. And so I benefited a lot just learning how real research actually works, which during the PhD was a bit, I mean, we didn't have that good a supervision in our PhD program, and we were a bit disconnected from this real academic life where you have to publish, you have to survive, and you have to build a career. And all these questions, I just learned about them during this first year as a postdoc. And so if you want to speak about these questions of how to measure the success of a postdoc program and also the success personally for us as postdocs, I would say, personally, if you think about publications, I probably have a bit of a similar experience as Andrei Alexandrovich. The two papers that I worked on and published during my postdoc time, these are now my most successful papers. They have been cited over 200 times, and then one was a study I wrote by myself. The other one was a joint paper with Andrei Alexandrovich and Tom Remington, and a young Russian scholar who worked with us, Vera Kulpina, and we studied the Russian and Chinese governance and compared them. And this also has become also a very successful paper. So this is the publication side. But more successfully, more importantly, is if you really want to measure the long-term success of the postdoc, was being integrated in this team. And I really have to say that the ICSID Institute has not become basically my academic family. This is my academic community where I feel happy and we meet like every year for, at least before the pandemic, now everything is online. But for conferences, we have joint workshops. When we go to conferences, normally we organize our panels together. We have joint panels. We obviously publish together. We write papers together, and we also apply for grant programs. And we just applied for a grant in December together with Andrei Alexandrovich and Alexander Liebmann in Berlin. So this is really this kind of socialization, to become part of an academic community. This is, I think, how a successful postdoc experience should look like. Yeah, and then finally, probably on how would you define, like, why do we actually need postdocs? So why it's important to have postdocs as an institution? So now that I'm kind of starting to hire postdocs for myself as a professor, so I'm supervising 4 PhD students at the moment, and I have one postdoc. And so there's a difference. And if you have PhD students, you still have to do a lot of supervision and a lot of, and it's more difficult for them to work independently also on research projects, or also to push a research project forward. Whereas this is something you can really count on a postdoc. It's just on a different level, and you can work on a different level already together with these people. So research-wise, this is really important. But it's obviously also important for the postdocs for their own career and to build their own career. So a postdoc is probably a crucial step in academia, because you kind of do your PhD and then you have to decide what you want to do. Do you want to stay in academia, which is a very challenging, and it's really not easy to survive in the long run in academia, because there's a lot of competition, a lot of difficulties, and especially now that I know a bit better the German job market, where we have to find a position as a professor after a certain number of years, because otherwise you just can't be hired anymore by universities. After 6 years after your PhD, if you don't get basically a professorship or a tenured position elsewhere, you are out, because no university will hire you for an additional 3 years. So there is a lot of pressure, a lot of competition, and then to learn how to navigate this environment is important. But this is what the postdoc really can teach you. And my final point would probably be on the design of these programs. And then this is something Alexandrovich and Alexander also already mentioned. There is actually really there seems to be a lot of competition on the postdoc market. We successfully hired the first postdoc, but for the second postdoc, was a mess up here at the administration. We just had a couple of weeks and had to very fast find somebody, and it just didn't work. There weren't enough people there. And we didn't get a single person who fitted the description, so we had to reformulate the position, and unfortunately we couldn't hire some PhD students and use the money in a different way. But because there is a lot of competition, one really has to think about how to design these programs in the most competitive and the most interesting way to attract interesting candidates and make it attractive for them. And it seems also to be the case that, especially, I mean, at least in this field of political economy that we are working in, that there are more and more qualified positions, and not that many more qualified people to apply for these positions. So the universities are actually competing for people, and which is kind of a paradox, because they're competing for postdocs, but then later on there are like very few positions actually for tenure professorships. So you get these postdocs, but then they have to look how to move. Yeah, this was, I think, more or less what I wanted to say.
Thank you. I actually wanted to reflect on something that you said. You said you need to make those positions more attractive to the postdocs. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by an attractive position? Are we talking about, well, first of all, of course, money, right? Because mm-hmm. one of the most frequent questions I get from people before they even apply, because we don't advertise our salary, how much will I get paid? Mm-hmm. Is that money, or is it something else when we talk about attractiveness?
I think money is definitely very important. So the one candidate that we had for this position that we finally couldn't fill, finally didn't come because he had to pay, he was from the US, he had a PhD in the US, and he had to repay a student loan. And the salaries in Germany are fixed by the state, so you can't really negotiate much. And so he said, this is just not enough. I just can't repay my student loans with this stuff. And then he had to leave academia, and he's no longer in academia, but is working in a job in business, because this was the only possibility for him to repay his student loans. Money is definitely important. Then, of course, there are other things, how you can, a 2-year position or a 3-year position is much better than having just a 1-year position, that you can start building a research portfolio and have something in the pipeline to apply it for other positions. And in 1 year, it's almost not possible. I mean, it's just you start working on something, and then you have to think about where I'm going to be in the next year, and you have to think about your job and worry about your job. And yeah, so like the time, I think time and money are probably the most important ones. The other benefits that you can get is like a nice environment, or for your family benefits and all this kind of stuff is nice, but it's not that crucial, I think, finally. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful, and you have actually a fascinating story. I followed some of the things you have done. I want to move to Israel, since he has actually been collaborating with us for longer than the program existed. And one of the most fascinating success stories here is that you have won an Russian Science Foundation research grant, which competing with Russians for Russian money, being a foreigner, and actually winning. I think that speaks a lot for your personal success. So I was wondering if you could reflect on that a little bit and talk about what you define as a successful postdoctoral program and success for yourself, and maybe any suggestions that you might have. Israel.
Sure. I mean, so just we've alluded to this a couple times. So just for people who don't know me, to be clear. So I, as Andrei Alexandrovich alluded to, I began working at HSC in 2011 as a research fellow, one of the founding members of the International Center for the Study of Institutions and Development. And ironically, you know, I always think of my time at HSC as sort of a pre-doc program. I don't know, Andrei Alexandrovich, if you even remember this, but after our first year, you know, I was thinking about going back to New York. I hadn't ever spent a lot of time in Russia, which is awkward for a Russian specialist. And I remember you asked me, you know, hey, we have some money. Would you like to just, you know, stay here? We'll find you, you know, some space in the Professorskaya Gostinitsa. We'll give you a small salary and you can just keep working from there. And so that's sort of where my HSC odyssey began. And then from there, once I was close to graduating, we had already had some ideas for some joint research projects. There was development of a new postdoc. I competed, I won, and sort of move on from there. What I would say for me, though, and what sort of reflecting on keeping in mind that my experience is abnormal in many ways, but at the same time, what I sort of reflected on, like what kept me at HSC, aside from a burning love of Moscow and HSC itself, was really what Michael alluded to, which is the sort of networking aspect of the whole thing. So, you know, at the risk of annoying several of my bosses and Vice Rector Yudkevich, publications really for postdocs are icing on the cake, but I think not the measure of success. The real measure of success is, one, you know, whether you're positioned and whether you have the certainty and the time to make yourself competitive for the academic market, and two, whether you're able to lay the seed corn, the relationships, the studies, the data necessary to then quickly go about putting yourself into position for tenure. Because, you know, as Michael alluded to, getting your foot in the door as an assistant professor is hard, getting tenure is even harder. And so one thing I've noticed in other universities is that quite often people who are successful in getting tenure are people who already have things ready to go and are able to slowly convert these into publications. And so for me particularly, what was interesting as a postdoc was the sort of certainty that I had that I could sit down for a year, talk to Professor Tom Remington, talk with Andrei Alexandrovich. We didn't mention, but our work was collaboratively with some colleagues at the Institute for Education, including Professor Frumin, and sort of take the time we needed to systematically come up with a good research project, write a good proposal, and then, you know, submit it to compete. And for me, at least, part of the reason that I was able to invest the time and the energy into that, as opposed to trying to churn out, you know, yet another low, well, not yet another low tier publication, but low tier publications, was specifically that I knew that HSC would guarantee me at least 2 years. And this is something, again, Michael alluded to, but I want to really crystallize. For postdocs particularly, yes, money is valuable, but I think that what universities really can emphasize that makes them more competitive is both relative certainty and not the fact that, you'll have 1 year and then, you'll get your foot in the door and you'll immediately be applying for your next job, which saps sort of the energy that people have for research, for collaboration, et cetera. And also really emphasizing the ability to apply and compete for grants. Again, this sort of Russian Science Foundation grant, it emerged because of a sort of a happy coincidence between what the federal government was doing at the time, the sort of need to study these new programs and reforms that were being put into place, my own research interests in public goods provision and social policy, and Andrei Alexandrovich's expertise in dealing with business, because the reforms were about sort of how the private sector would integrate. And again, I wish I could give you the magic formula. Here's how we get, people to compete for these grants and to do it successfully. But, a lot of it just happened to be what we were interested in, what we thought we could accomplish. And then in terms of the grant itself, I think this is one of the advantages of the postdocs. I mean, I've actually been reasonably successful applying for Russian grants, more so, strangely enough, than international ones, specifically because, my sort of international expertise and experiences enable me to take what many colleagues would regard as sort of boring Russia-specific questions and frame them for a broader literature, and both at the level of the Russian Science Foundation, but even, a recent grant that I and a couple of my colleagues won from our faculty, the Faculty of Social Sciences. It's really useful to have these perspectives to take what seem to be sort of idiosyncratic Russian issues and say, like, no, actually, Russia is an important area of research for the social sciences. And here's how we can speak to things that no other country would allow us to speak to, and sort of apply methods that would not be applicable elsewhere. So moving back, I'm not sure if that's sort of sufficient reflection. It's rather scattershot. But moving back to the question of success. So again, from the individual level, I think both as somebody who's gone through this, but also as somebody who's worked with quite a few of our colleagues at ICSID, I think that for individuals, the networks are actually quite important. And so advertising those network ties and the ability to build them and to build on them is, I think, extraordinarily important. And also fundamentally what lasts, right? Like your publication in your tier 1 journal is great. People remember you for a couple of years for it, but then they want to know what's next, right? So the network is the sort of gift that keeps on giving, the ability to constantly go back to colleagues, think of new ideas, generate new ideas, and generate new top-tier publications. From the standpoint of the institution, I don't have much to add that other colleagues really haven't. I really do think that postdocs, as opposed to faculty members, are an investment and should be viewed as such. And as we know, all good investments take time. One thing that I think we should think about, though, both in terms of making a stronger pitch for funding for our postdocs, is specifically thinking about how we can try to track these unquantifiable things. So, sort of scores of engagement, the extent to which people continue to work with HSC faculty members, the extent to which people continue to participate in our conference, the extent to which people invite our researchers to their conferences. Because I think this is really important for advancing the reputation of HSC, particularly, I don't want to comment too much on it, but the situation being what it is geopolitically, I think that the ability to show that we have these collaborative ties which build on themselves and persist over time is, I think, very, very important for pushing back on some of the sort of negative images that people have of Russia and of Russian science as being sort of insular as well. So I think that's where I will leave it.
Thank you, Israel. Well, you do have an interesting story. I think with 3 of our former postdocs, each story is unique. And I have to say that I do keep much better track of tenure track faculty than of postdocs, especially those that come and go after 1 year. Those I really don't keep my tabs on. Those that stay a little bit longer, of course, I learn more about. I have to say that from my perspective, every story of a faculty member who comes through international recruiting is unique. But that's probably because I haven't paid attention much at stories of Russian faculty members, and maybe each one is unique as well. But of course, one of the most unique approaches, I mean, one of the most unique aspects is whether you are a foreigner or whether you're Russian, but you come from a foreign university. You bring in very different experience and you relate differently to what is happening here. So your success in the program defines the development of this program and success for future postdocs. So your stories, of course, are very helpful in that regard. And I think I should let Professor Chipurenko, who likely joined us, he actually had some other commitments, maybe reflect a little bit on his view of a success of postdoctoral story, because he has been he just taken the not very thankful, I would just say a thankless task of being the head of a selection committee that goes through hundreds of postdoctoral applications already selected by the respective research units. And his task is to manage this process of selecting the 50 lucky individuals who will join us for every year of postdoctoral program. So he sees you all before you enter in. So I wanted to give him a few minutes to reflect on not only how he defines success, he has already put this in the chat, but maybe some other ideas he might have for us. Alexander Yuryevich, you are muted.
Thank you, Valentina, for giving me a chance before we are concluding our session. Yeah, really, I have already posted in the chat what are, to my perspective, the criteria of how to measure the efficiency of a postdoc program, which is very much important now for us because we have already some years of experience, not more starting from the zero level. Yeah. Some of our departments, labs, institutions have 3, 5, 7 years of experience in hiring postdocs, so we could measure already the efficiency of different institutional parts of the IHC, taking some more or less robust criteria, like how sustainable is the attractivity of the department, in case it is an efficient competition of aspirants, let's say 5, 6, 7 very good aspirants each year. It is for me a clear sign that the institution has a good reputation, that people who are already engaged as postdocs reported in their academic networks, thus attracting newcomers and so on. Secondly, surely the quantity and quality of papers which are published jointly. It may happen in 3, 4, 5 years after the colleague was part of this postdoc program, we know it, but nevertheless, on a long time period, we could have the possibility to assess it. Then, yeah, it is clear that not all who have spent some years at the HEC will remain here. People will travel, people will take other opportunities, other offers. Anyway, the career tracks of those who were part of the program are also, for me, a clear sign or clear criteria how to measure the efficiency. If people then leave for very good universities abroad or in Russia, it's one story. One people disappear forever or leave the academic track or whatever else. Yeah, it is another extreme point. And surely it's the engagement of people who are now at the postdoc position in the department, whether they do participate in teaching and several kinds of other activities of university. But that are this criteria. But some general ideas. While I was calling me to give some general ideas about the program. First of all, I think now we should switch to another system of hiring, something like a two-speed system. We have already some institutions, some labs, which have already a very good and clear success story with postdocs. We should give them more opportunities to decide by themselves whom they will hire, when, to which conditions, providing them with some places from this university contingent we have every year and so on. And surely we have some only now took the first chance to participate at the program. In such case, we should use the expertise at the university level. Second idea of me is I always pledged that postdocs would be mostly chosen by research labs and research institutions, then by departments and schools. Because being myself for a long time head of a department, I had always the problem, or I was always thinking about the risks. The risks are, first, I will provide this guy or this lady the possibility to be included in our curriculum, and 1 year he or she is leaving, and I have again a gap in my curriculum, which I again should fill in with a new person, and maybe also with a new course, which is now very much difficult because the academic heads of the programs and the department heads are two parts of the market. And even if I am convinced that this person will fit, the academic supervisor of the program may have another position. So it is quite difficult. Yeah? And second, without having any experience in cooperating with the colleague, without having any experience how he or she is giving public lectures, how he or she is communicating with colleagues, with students, it is a bit risky, yeah, to let this person give a course at a program. Therefore, it's the first argument. But even the more important is the second argument. Postdocs should be committed to make research. And we have plenty of possibilities at the university to welcome them exactly at research labs and institutions. And when starting to work here, starting collaborating here with other colleagues, they could be step by step engaged also in other forms of activities. And over this period of postdoc, they could show his or her abilities to be welcomed at any educational program, at any department, and so on. So that are my two observations from my own experience with this postdoc program. Thank you.
Alexander, thank you very much. Thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts. And like I said, having had the thankless task of managing this unruly group of people, academics who are selecting our postdocs, you have a very different perspective on how this process works. So I very much appreciate you being here and sharing it with us. I do want to, even though we are running late, I'm grateful for those of you who are still here. I do want to give one last chance to say something to Yulia Grinkiewicz, who is, as you know, has another thankless task, and that is support and administrative, not just support, but all things that our postdocs have to deal with once they cross the border. They deal with me before they cross the border. Once they cross the border, they become a part of Yulia's domain, and that has everything to do with their documents and integration and welcoming them to HEC community. So I wanted her to share her perspective on postdoctoral success.
Thank you very much, but I will try to be as concise as possible. What is most important, I would say, a result of the program, that it has shifted the whole situation, how the administrative support is organized within the university, because the university is successful until the moment when, as an organization, it is it can be successful in not just getting people started being the part of the community, but wanting them to continue to become the part of this community. And this is the gap that is depending not only on the exact amount of people or the specific team of the researchers they're being a part of, but kind of the effort of the whole university in terms of making sure that we would provide some very important things so that people, the situation, even though we're working across legal system, across different academic backgrounds and experiences, still would at least provide or make our best in making the situation transparent, and we can provide access to the general set of rules, policies, and procedures which work and define the framework for everybody within the university community. That is the most important part. And I think when the program started and we had a number of people who would not be possible to neglect anymore because that wasn't the business of a specific lab or a faculty, but now the university on the whole. So it is really shifted the expectations from the university services and the support provided. And I believe that to be a very, very positive shift, so that would actually draw the university up to the level when we can make it possible for people to do and to make this transition from across the border. So making us a bit closer to the idea when we're becoming the part of the world academic society. That's it. And I would just also want to say huge thank you, because once we started 7 years ago, we also part of this solution was not only working with the InfoHub for international faculty, through which we're trying to make, to provide this access to the policies and procedures and how things work inside, but also, and manage the expectations, but also we started the supplement for the University Bulletin, Окна академического роста, which is the HSO look. And surprisingly, but probably not surprisingly, the people here are the ones who were the most devoted contributors to what we were trying to do, because that was also about networking and putting the community together. So we do have two current, the last our issues devoted to postdocs and DCs, and we have interviews there, and we try to kind of show how that might develop and work within HSC University. So Jana, would you please kindly, because I don't want to get back to slides, share the links, so for those who are interested, for the copies of the HSC look, and say thank you for Michael and Israel and Andrei Alexandrovich and all other people who are with us doing that and helping us. with that. So just the links. Yes, if you can copy them and share them in the chat, that would be great. Thank you very much. That's it. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Yulia, and thank you again for all of our experts, and to everyone who spent the last hour, over an hour and a half, with us through some of the problems with MS Teams. It's my fault I jinxed it, because before we started, I said, you know, MS Teams has been wonderful, the conference has been running smoothly, so yeah, I jinxed it. But thanks a lot. It was actually a very interesting session. We've heard some fascinating stories, and I jotted down some of the things that I will share with you once we're done. And then going into our anniversary year next year, in 2022, I think we might focus a little bit more on the individual postdoc success stories so that we can make this program even more successful. Thanks a lot, everyone, and have a good Friday.